Well, good Wednesday evening, everyone, on the 7th of October 2020, as we are doing another tropical update with Hurricane Delta in the Gulf of Mexico now, after making landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula between Cancun and Cozumel early this morning, and now it has emerged into the Gulf of Mexico and is beginning to re-intensify as it continues its northwestward track and eventually northward turn into the southern Louisiana coast and have more impacts on the Gulf Coast over the next several days, particularly on Friday. Remember to make all decisions solely based upon official forecast data and official forecast products from the National Hurricane Center, your local emergency management jurisdictions, or your local National Weather Service offices. We have Hurricane Delta here in the Gulf of Mexico, looking as most impressive as it really has in its lifetime, despite being now a Category 1 hurricane after emerging off the Yucatan Peninsula. This is the visible satellite imagery true color band, and you can see this line here crossing from right to left is actually the sunset. It's called the terminator. And so we have visible satellite of Hurricane Delta, and then it switches over to shortwave infrared satellite imagery, so we can still see the storm, but not truly what's appearing, from the surface of the Earth, or from above in space looking down to the surface of the Earth. But we do see a lot of, very robust convection spawning up just before sunset in the storm, and typically overnight we have these diurnal cycles, and you tend to have these big explosions of convection and a lot more thunderstorm activity due to radiative effects, due to frontogenesis, frontogenetical processes and things like that happen when the sun goes down, and stuff with thermodynamics in the atmosphere really too deep to get into in this video, but the diurnal process favors intensification overnight, and it looks like Delta may be beginning a phase of that. If we switch over to infrared satellite, you can see this really dark black color, black and white and gray colors. Those indicate very robust convection, and it looks much more like a hurricane than it did last night when it looked just kind of like a blob. So it has weakened considerably to a Category 1 hurricane again, but you have to remember that it was dealing with some dealing with some mid-level wind shear. It was kind of displacing the circulation, so it was a little bit off-centered. Looked a little bit wonky in terms of a storm, but now it has emerged into the Gulf of Mexico, and now it is going to continue over the western Gulf of Mexico, where there is some moderately warm ocean waters that should help it intensify slightly again before making landfall on the Louisiana coast. Now, where exactly is Delta going? We can take a look at the National Hurricane Center official forecast cone of uncertainty to see, and you can see that the cone has really narrowed and has kind of clustered, or the model guidance, the spaghetti models as we refer to them, have really tightly clustered on the southwestern portion of Louisiana once again, very similar to the track that Hurricane Laura took back in, I believe that was late August. I can't even remember the exact days that Hurricane Laura was occurring. the hurricane season has felt like ages, but you can see here that Hurricane Delta has reemerged over the southern Gulf of Mexico. Maximum sustained winds of 90 miles per hour, moving northwest at 17. We'll continue on that trajectory through tomorrow afternoon before beginning a northward jog and possibly forecast to and expected to become a major hurricane once again. That's Category 3 or higher, before possibly being downgraded once again to, I hate using the word downgraded because any hurricane is strong. A hurricane is a strong thing. It's a threshold that is met when winds are 74 miles per hour or greater. If you have that magnitude of wind, there's going to be damage. It's a strong hurricane. It doesn't matter if it's a Category 1, 2, 3. The impacts are minimal. A lot of the problems that we have here in North Carolina, which is where I'm based out of, are from Category 1 hurricanes. You think of Matthew, you think of Florence, you think of Isaias this year. All the problems come from Category 1 hurricanes. Don't get too stuck on the category because it's important to remember the impacts. And the impacts are not limited to this little cone. There will be, rainfall felt in Mississippi and Alabama and in eastern Texas most likely, and the winds as well and storm surge. So you can see these, if I scroll down a bit, hurricane watches and tropical storm watches for basically all of coastal Louisiana into the Mississippi Delta area, and you can see that is expected to, make landfall as a strong hurricane, then quickly weaken to a storm, a depression, and then become post-tropical as it heads up into the Ohio River Valley. Now, in terms of the actual, intensity forecast of the storm, we can look at something from the Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, And we can look at something called ocean heat content to see how much fuel is available for the hurricane to potentially intensify. So right now we see this little viewer, we see the current position of Delta maybe a little bit behind there. It's more over this little reef island right about here at this point, but it's expected to intensify into a Category 2 hurricane, then a major hurricane, a 3, and then potentially drop back to a Category 2 as it approaches the southwestern coast of Louisiana. And we can flip on the ocean heat content layer here to see, and overall you can see that it was in a so ocean heat content is a combination of both warm ocean waters, but it has to be deep warm ocean water and has to have a lot of rich content, a lot of rich warm water for the hurricane to maintain itself and intensify. And it was over a period, or over an area I should say, in the Western Caribbean of some very rich ocean heat content and very deep warm water. And then it crossed over the Yucatan, lost a little bit of its steam, and it's going to come back over a moderate area of ocean heat content, but not nearly as much as it was in the Western Caribbean. And that's going to be interesting to see how it handles that and how it intensifies or how it maintains its strength due to that. The challenge of having the ocean heat content in the western Gulf of Mexico being warmer than the eastern Gulf of Mexico. You can see the cold wake coming down here as a result from a series of several potent cold fronts, and also from the wake of Hurricane Laura and Hurricane Sally as well, actually stirring up some of the water and causing some of the ocean heat content to be replaced with cooler water up at the surface, which is a detriment to tropical cyclones. So that's certainly good news. If it were taking in track to the eastern Gulf of Mexico, that would probably have much more of an impact on its intensity, but it looks like it's going to stay in the western Gulf of Mexico and still stay out of that zone where it's not too much of a hindrance to the storm. So unfortunately, it looks to be dodging that cooler ocean heat content. So that is something to keep in mind for the intensity forecast. Jumping over to the Coastal Emergency Risks Assessment, this is a neat viewer that shows storm surge potential, and I'm going to talk about that in the next slide as well, but you can see the current position of the storm tomorrow, and then by Friday getting up into this area, and then by late Friday making a landfall on the Gulf Coast. It's in the Gulf of Mexico now. It's got to hit land before it gets back out to sea, wherever it is, so that's something we'll have to really keep an eye on. And it's kind of, certain, kind of baked in at this point that there's going to be a U.S. impact, just because there's nowhere else for the storm to go in terms of, it's landlocked by the rest of the Gulf of Mexico on the perimeter of the Gulf of Mexico, I should say. So, something to keep in mind there, that a Gulf Coast impact is fairly certain at this point. It's just a matter of where exactly it happens. Now this current forecast track, and this matches up with this cone, it's just overlaid on a different background here. Hitting some areas that have a lot of hurricane fatigue right now. Lake Charles, Lafayette, both areas that dealt with Hurricane Laura about a month and a half ago, and are still recovering from that. And the track keeps creeping a little bit to the west each day. I've seen it, and it was more central Louisiana. Now it's more southwestern Louisiana again. So something we'll have to keep an eye on. Storm surge. Anytime you have the storm coming up this way along this long fetch of water in the Gulf of Mexico, it is rotating this way, and it's going to be rotating all the way inland, and it pushes water up against the coast, and then on the left side it pulls water away. So if you're to the left of the circulation, storm surge threat is really minimized, because the storm actually kind of pushes water away from the coast and is helpful. But if you're to the right of the circulation, which it was a bit, I don't want to say controversy with Hurricane Laura, but the track kind of took it directly through Lake Charles. So what happened was all of the worst storm surge was recognized on the right side of the circulation, where there is very little population in the estuary habitat, wetland habitat, bayou habitat of south central Louisiana. The forecast had, at one point kind of taken it more the Louisiana and Texas border, which would have focused the worst of the storm surge through the Calcasieu River and Calcasieu Parish up through Lake Charles. And fortunately that scenario did not happen, and it was displaced a little bit more to the east. So communities, though they're few and far between, communities still got devastated by storm surge. You just didn't see it on the news. You didn't hear about it because there were much, the worst storm surge, which I believe, I don't want to say that because I'm not entirely sure, but I believe there was a high water mark found on a damaged house about 12 or 13 feet of storm surge during hurricane lore. I'm not sure. A lot of estimates and things are still going on with that storm, realizing the aftermath of it. But overall, the worst storm surge was realized, and now the current track has the worst storm surge coming up through New Iberia, up through Lafayette, and this even has the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya, I believe that's how you pronounce that river, I believe is right here, having storm surge up through there and going upstream. I'm not really buying the Mississippi River at this time. We'll have to see about that, but a lot of interesting things can happen in terms of storm surge with these storms, because it's just a matter of, what direction the wind is blowing and how long it stays that way. What's one of the good things with Delta, as I move on here, is that the flooding rain threat is lowered because of its continued forward speed. So the wind threat, pretty extreme down here in south central Louisiana. Then potential for hurricane force winds from Lake Charles, all the way from Beaumont to Lake Charles to Lafayette to Morgan City. The storm surge threat realized in this area down here. Flooding rain threat is, quite low. There's potential for major flooding rain around Lake Charles again, but, a couple of inches of rain, or several inches of rain, I should say, but overall not a huge, freshwater flooding issue. This would be a storm surge thing to watch for. And the tornado threat displaced to this right quadrant again of the storm because of the friction when those storms come on shore. They begin to rotate, and then, or individual cells come on shore rotating, and then they begin to rotate as well, and then you have a bunch of curlicues coming on that end up being tornadoes, very short-lived but very destructive tornadoes as well. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and wrap up this video. I'll leave it on this satellite image for as we close out here. But the bottom line is simply that Hurricane Delta is expected to intensify into a strong hurricane, already a strong storm, but even a stronger hurricane, before making a landfall in southern Louisiana, some areas that have been hit hard by hurricanes already in the past few months. And we will see how the track evolves over the next day or so, and see if any adjustments need to be made in that track. That'll be reflected in National Hurricane Center forecast. But overall, a strong hurricane is poised to hit the Gulf Coast once again for this hurricane season. So we will have to wait and see what evolution Hurricane Delta has and what impacts it leaves in its wake. So thanks for watching this video. Feel free to comment, like, subscribe, share, and I will be back tomorrow in another video update about Hurricane Delta. Thanks, and stay safe.